Been in Haight-Ashbury most of my life. I'm going to be 47 years old in May. I was born in 1956. When I was a kid, Haight Street was like a little sleepy neighborhood. It was like a rundown, middle-class, going downhill neighborhood. All of a sudden then, around the time I was about 11 years old in 1967, the neighborhood became the birthplace of the American hippie movement. My parents would always say, oh, let's walk down Haight Street and see the hippies. And we'd go to the children's playground. All of a sudden we're seeing all these people with long hair and flowers and drums and flutes, and it was just very colorful because the children's playground in Golden Gate Park is right next to Hippie Hill. I actually got into the culture really young and started doing drugs at a very young age. Like by 13 I was already smoking pot, and by the time I was 14 I had had a really bad LSD trip and ended up in a hospital for 3 days on LSD. The hippies were giving the drugs away for free in the park. It was so easy to get everything. It's a bit much for a 14-year-old kid to be handling, and so I ended up in a straitjacket in an emergency room being shot up on Thorazine for 3 days. We were watching, bands like Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead play for free in the park. By the time I was a little bit older, I was actually able to know who the bands were, and I had a little 8mm movie camera, and I used to actually film a lot of the bands out in the park. So I used to document Haight Street. About the time I was 16, 1972, I got a little Super 8mm movie camera and I was filming Haight Street. But by then Haight Street had already gone into a decline. The peak of the Haight Street, the Summer of Love and the hippies, was like 1966, 1967, 1968. And then in 1972 I moved back to Haight Street. And in that time I was gone, Haight Street had gone in a really bad decline. It ended up being horrible for the neighborhood. In broad daylight there were all kinds of murders, and stores were all getting robbed, and tourists were being robbed. So by 1971, Haight Street was pretty much a ghost town. So in 1976, Bob was closing the Phoenix up, and I go up to him and I go, Bob, you can't close down the Phoenix. This is all that's left of Haight-Ashbury from the 60s. And he'd watched me grow up as a little kid. So he said, Jimmy, you want to be the last hippie? When I'm headed off to Maui, and I'm going to close the store down. Whatever is left in the shop afterwards, just take it out. In 1976, everything on Haight Street was boarded up. You can tell by this picture, the store next to me has boards in the windows. And we contacted this guy who owned this building at 1409 Haight Street, and we said, do you want to rent that building? He says, I haven't rented that since 1968. Take the boards off the window and we'll talk about some rent a year from now when you've got the thing going up. So we got the store rent-free. I had all the old fixtures from the Phoenix, and so in 1976 I opened up the store White Rabbit. So in 1982 we opened up the shop called Distractions, and back then we went very much more on more of the pipe thing. The whole cocaine thing was all over. I didn't want anything to do with that anymore. But we didn't have very many choices back then. Back then, around 1982, your basic choice of a pipe would be something made out of acrylic, pretty much. There was a lot of ceramic, hand-blown water pipes, or lots of plastic things to choose from, or these little Indian, like hookahs, lots of Indian pipes. In the 60s, when I used to first go to the stores in the 60s, the pipes from India were about all you could see. Indian pipes like this, or like all brass with like a little handle coming off, were about the only pipes you would find back in the 60s on Haight Street. By the time we got Distractions opened in the 80s, there was much more plastic was the big thing back in the 80s, or ceramic. The very first glass pipes that were ever available, these were probably around in the late 70s, early 80s. They were like this. They were without a carburetor, but they were a very small bowl, and this same company, this is the company that was making them back then, and that was the only glass pipes I would see back in the late 70s, early 80s. When you get the detail and the depth of all of this is more in the last 5 years, I'd say we're getting the depth and the thickness. I mean, these are so durable, boom, that's not going to break, excuse me. But, the old days you couldn't throw a pipe on the ground like that. And that is like pretty much the birth of the glass in our shop. And from what I gather, we were probably one of the first stores in America selling glass because of that, because we actually are in the culture, we care about the glass, we do smoke ourselves, and it's not all about the money for us. It's I love glass. It's like Christmas. Every time a glass blower opens up his case for me, it's like Christmas, opening up the presents, figuring out what we're going to get. And I love it. It's kept the store really fun and interesting the entire time. There's never a dull moment. I think it's the way most people prefer to smoke, whether you use it in a water pipe or use it in a hand pipe. I wouldn't personally smoke out of anything but a glass piece anymore. We love the art of it. It's like Tiffany stained glass windows 100 years ago. People bought those and they were practical and usable, and yet 100 years later these things are works of art that are worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.